All right, welcome everyone to the next multi-networking community sync. Today's February 28th, and today on the agenda, I want to continue the use cases discussion. I think this is one of the major, even on the CAP, one of the major kind of feedbacks that our current use cases are looking like solutions rather than just real life use cases. To kind of resume from last week, we kind of identified few of those of what we want to cover without specifying solution. That's what I think we started moving into some discussion where like some VRFs can be used or something. That's exactly what we want to avoid. Like for the telecom, we had quite really good discussion on what exactly we do want to achieve, what is really needed for them, and with multi-networking. We have the use case for AI/ML, and then the one that I introduced is producer-consumer. Any other comments to what we discussed last week? If not, then let me just move to the next one. So the next, I think, one will be the.
I was on mute.
Yes, go ahead, Per.
Yeah, no, like I said, I checked around with VRFs, and from Go, it's actually quite straightforward nowadays.
So and Per, that's thanks for looking that into that. But let's make sure that's again a solution, right? To the problem. That's yeah, that's
I
how we
wouldn't
can
say
do
so. I
that.
would say as soon as you do multi-networking, you always end up in what that you want to have different routing tables. So it's really hard to go around it. But if we don't want it to, fine.
No, Per. We can talk, and let's talk about that, because what I can tell you on that is your implementation might require it. When I look at my use cases, I don't. I can get away with just one default gateway, and then all the other interfaces will have some static route with some specific CIDRs for them, and that's
If you don't have
perfectly fine.
overloaded IP addresses, sort of fine, right?
Yeah.
Then yeah.
And that's fair, yes. Overlapping IPs, is that what you refer to?
Yeah, or if you have sort of that your networks points into a customer network, and you don't know what routes it has. You said you can set static routes, but that means that you have absolute control over which networks that's used on those
That's
interfaces,
and
and I
that's
would
fair,
say
yeah.
that's a use case that is not very common.
Okay, I hear you, and that's fair. But again, let's entertain that. I could use a user space DPDK based application that would have the whole thing baked into that, right? I know it's more complex, but I might be exaggerating
It
here a
makes
bit.
no
But
difference. I mean, we do that. You still end up with your VRFs. It depends on if you export
then
your
no,
interfaces out
my
from
point
the DPDK
per
or not.
per
Yeah.
my point is it's up to implementation how they handle that. It's not part of the use case. That's what I'm trying to point out. Is that true or not?
So if you want to run a routing daemon or something like that, it's going to run out in the pond, right? But I mean, if we don't want to do it, I mean, I think it's quite straightforward and simple. So from this way, you can say that, okay, great, then we don't need to discuss it. It should be simple for someone that
No,
needs to
per
figure it out and do it.
it's so question of whether we're gonna do it or not. That's already defined. I say we will never do it because I would tell you that's a implementation specific, and so I cannot already answer you.
But
That will not be part of the CAP insert
but
saying that.
everything is implementation specific in one way, right? You say sort of
Sure,
IP
but
domains and where addresses are valid is a part of life. You cannot just choose to ignore it. It's there. You can say we support it, we don't support it, but that's different.
what I'm trying to tell you, Per, is your implementation might need that sophistication and other won't. And I would not impose that onto the global Kubernetes community to have, oh, you have to deal with VRFs now with multi-networking. That will be definitely outright to say, oh
No,
no,
say
now
that
you're
you
even
have
going.
to, but you have to is different from saying that you can.
That's and exactly. And that's what I'm trying to say. Can, so this is when it's being implementation specific.
So
Michael, you have a hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, yeah, there's probably multiple ways to, you know, accomplish the gold VRFs in your notes. So yeah, this probably is more or less implementation. However, it's very worth, you know, sharing the findings of, you know, the SETA experiment here. But I think to the point, this is implementation specific.
I just have to say one more thing, and that's
Yeah, go ahead.
Anders, good to see you again. I mean, Anders and I've worked together from mid-90s, early 90s, actually.
Yeah, we did. I have a cold, so I cannot speak today. You can be happy with it.
Well, good to, I'll give you a ring later. It's been a lifetime.
All right. So, any other thing you want to add to that, Per?
No, I mean, it's sort of just saying that VRFs are there. I mean, and if
Sure.
and they're not, from what I see now, not really a problem.
Yeah,
Go has all the expressivity that's needed to deal with them.
But Per, how would you tie the different domains of VRF to an application?
So, well, I wrote something on the mailing list, but basically using a SO bind to device, to the VRF device itself.
Okay, I understand. I just want to know.
And you can also put a resolver in there that you bind to that SO device. So if the DNS resolver is in the customer's network. Only problem there is that if it's a V6 only network and you get V4 and V6 addresses back, Go resolver is stupid. But that's another thing. Sorry for taking that time, but
all right. So the next use case that I think was on our we missed here was the I'm not sure how to call it. Let's call it private cloud. So basically, I want to build on top of Kubernetes my cloud where I can support VMs, VM workloads, pod workloads, support multi-tenancy, and basically whatever you can do and you can imagine in terms of cloud specific stuff. I'm not sure whether that's the right wording for this title. If you think that's not exactly that, let me know, give me some better hints, but you know what I mean. KubeVirt with VMs, pods on the side, and multi-tenancy. Any other? Any other comments to this? To the private cloud approach? Anything else to add? Is that the right description of this?
Maybe it's a private cloud / hybrid cloud, maybe.
Was that? What do you mean by hybrid?
That you would have both an on-premise cloud as well as like public or private cloud situation.
So that's just interaction with just another cloud, right, Doug? Won't that be just, you still have to have the private cloud first, right? Anyway, from that point of view.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's
what the hybrid adds, what the hybrid changes here.
All right, so maybe I would say maybe instead I would add a bullet point here that would say on premise, right? Or hybrid cloud, right? Because the distinction is that you have gear on premise, and you may have existing networking and needs there that you may not have in your like public cloud side of the situation.
Oh, I see what you're saying. And okay, now I see that use case. Okay. So basically this is just disconnected fully. Okay, here is hybrid cloud on premise / hybrid cloud. And what will be the okay? So let's that's good to distinguish those two. But then, what's so specific about the hybrid approach that you would need for multi-networking? And let's keep in mind, you don't want to, or you said you have a networking, but then it still boils down. Isn't that similar to, let's say I have, or maybe not, maybe you're right.
Maybe I
Access
care
to-
more about the on-premise side of it. I don't need to muddy it with a hybrid at the
Okay.
moment. I mean, I could see possibilities, and I've heard people ask about multi-networking in the hybrid situation, but it's really the on-premise side that I'm most interested in. But I do bring up the hybrid as a consideration.
So basically on-premise cluster where I want to interconnect with multiple, won't that be just you connect to one of the networks in the on-premise, and where would there be the multi-networking use case here? If you think about like, and let's make sure it's not, let's not mix on-premise with telco, right? Because telco it's explicitly kind of called out already. So what will be so specific about the on-premise use case? And I just, yeah, I'm just poking holes a bit here, Doc, to kind of work out the
I mean, poke holes all you want, but the bottom line is, in on-premise situations, it's very likely that your network came before your
Sure. Okay.
your Kubernetes installation, and it would be any of the isolation use cases would apply there, for example, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Michael.
I was gonna just extend on the on-premise use cases that I've worked in environments that were very segregated, where resources needed access to multiple different types of multiple networks, and then also separating. There's another use case where people separate it, internal or corporate and more, where other instances needed access to those multiple networks or layer 2 domains.
But then, okay.
So in a lot of cases, we would have VMs with 10 different NICs and 10 different networks or multiple VLANs as for whatever reason. And these were our like trading environments. And then we had separation between corporate and then external. But I think the main was that we had our networks very heavily segregated. And there were use cases where we had X amount of networks for our VMs. And at this point now, I know they're moving to Kubernetes.
Okay. And what will multi-networking add here? This is where I'm trying to grasp that. Would that mean that I have a pod that connects to those segregated networks? Or won't that just mean that I connect my Kubernetes to just this one network that is isolated?
Well, the application itself. So this was when they are in the VMware world. They are since now migrating away from VMware to a different solution, simply because of the costs of VMware have grown exponentially. And now they actually are moving to Kubernetes, where they want to replicate this behavior from what they had in ESXi and the vSphere into Kubernetes. So it's not just the node, it's the pod itself needs to be isolated, and in both kernel isolated, and regular just namespace isolation.
Per?
Yeah, I guess to say in reality we have, I guess you can say, two network types. Networks that are only existing in, call it the cloud or the Kubernetes system that you're running, and we have networks that extend outside. And if you have a mix, I mean, if you have a hybrid cloud, then you can be sure that your networks, I mean, they span and goes out over some sort of public or private transport. So they need to leave the facility where a cluster is, and you need to have some way to do that, right? So I don't know if we call them internal and external networks, but in one case, you can create them completely isolated in your machinery.
Hmm.
So I don't know if that's the different. So private cloud here, is it seen as it runs just in one place? What you have instantiated?
What's
Or is
that,
it-
Per?
Well, would it be cross zone or cross? I mean, the on premise. So the way Doug spoke about it was a hybrid solution. And hybrid, you can be sure that it's running in two different environments, right?
Mm.
It's more like what is really the difference between them. So when it comes from a multi-networking perspective.
That's fair, but I think we want to call out like use cases, right? And this is fair, right? Like on-premise world where we have a strict legacy stuff that we just want to adapt to, right? Rather than other way around. So that's the aspects here, I think.
And as soon as we touch VMs, typically we also come into the problem that we don't have, and we don't want to have network orchestration in Kubernetes proper, right? But I mean, in the environments around that exist. And someone is going to have to make all that glue that ties these things together for the specific product.
That's, yeah, fair. Any other use cases that we want to call out? I think right now we have 5. Out of the ones that we initially kind of come up with, I think we have 5 quite a solid ones. Any other ones? I think let's maybe look at this kind of what we had before.
So,
And
so inside telecom, should we split it up? I mean, we have several different ones. You have things like private 5G, which typically will run on cloud. I already see today offerings on private 5G running, just like I said, as a private cloud.
But
that
what
you
is the
can-
real need here? This is what we kind of try to drill down into, Per. Lead through what we had today and see whether what we mentioned
Yeah,
here.
so the telecom use cases here are more like it's a telco that will run it, as I see it. You run it, it's one of the telco companies, but you also have some use cases where you take telco applications and run them on sort of normal environments.
So so this is something that I definitely want to avoid. Telecom should be just one use case, because if we put telecom as a whole as a use cases is niche use case, and basically we're gonna be pushed back. We need to find more enterprise use cases to be more valid as a feature to be wider
And
support.
what I'm saying that some telco applications are becoming enterprise.
I agree. That's fair.
Yeah.
Yes, that's fair. But do those need multi-networking? And why would they need it?
I
Is
would
it-
say some do, yes.
So yeah, give me.
But I mean, so yeah, but it's like okay, let's keep it like this for now. I would say that private 5G does, because it's really hard to do the call it. I mean, the function called UPF if you don't have multi-networking.
Right, but
Question is,
basically we already had this, right?
but the question is really, and we discussed. I don't know if you were here. So where the networking things. Networks can live inside a pod without Kubernetes knowing anything about it. And that's typically if you take tunnels into the pod, you can create internal interfaces in there, right? If you just have an environment that allows that, and you still just have your ETH0 interface because the other interfaces
No,
are
and we
carried over.
explicitly called this one out because we were thinking about this last week, and we explicitly
I
called
know.
this one out that if you're gonna have, let's say, a lot of UDP traffic, you're gonna oversaturate your link. So yes, I agree with you. That's one of the solutions, but we explicitly called out
Yeah.
that will kill the performance,
Yeah.
right? So that idea, it is always a valid idea. I agree with you, but it won't work for this. That's why we kind of add that, right?
Yeah, no. Sort of it's.
Let me again go back to here. Where do I had it here? Oh, I had it here. Okay.
Let's start with this. I think the other things can
Let me-
probably be derived as
So basically, I want to go over what we have currently and see whether those fit into the stories, right, that we created, right? So data plane, control plane, this is our telecom, right, use case. This is again a telecom use case. This is basically separation of, and so this is multi-tenancy. This is the private cloud approach, right, where I want to have separating networks for each pod. And if you don't agree, just stop me in tracks, and if there's I'm missing something, then let me know. This is private cloud again. This is virtual machine. So basically, those two are the same.
Like I said before, I think the first ones, if it's there are VRFs involved or not, is doesn't really matter.
No, this is exactly, it matters because we need to have separate data plane. This is what we are saying to prevent oversaturation of control plane.
Yeah, but what I'm saying, if there is a VRF there or not, doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter, no.
Yeah.
So now this is, I assume this would be the on-premise use case with old networks that we have to apply, right, and connect to. Story 6, this is the multi-tenancy use case, so the private cloud. 6 is basically giving power user, so this is just a solution. This is a virtual machine, so private cloud, right? Abilities to, should we call this out, this capability of hot plugin ability in the use case? Probably we could, right, as well add that as an element. But this is private cloud.
So
this is
in this use case, you can be sure you need to support VRFs.
Yeah.
100%, because the VMs, it's sort of something you do in your VMs, right?
I wouldn't say so. Google Cloud has multi-NIC in nodes, and we don't support VRFs, and we don't do anything with VRFs about it. It's up to the it's up to
no. It's like the thing is this, right? That you're gonna run. Oh well, okay, you can get around it perhaps.
That's what I'm saying. It's up to the application inside the VM to say, "Oh, I want VRFs because I'm gonna do this and that," right?
Yeah.
So,
but
that's what I'm trying to call out.
If they have that, if they have that, then you cannot mix their packets down into one. So if you run different VRFs on ETH0 and ETH1 there, you cannot dump them down on two interfaces that are in the same VRF. Then you have that needs to, so you need to be able to mirror in the pod what you have in the VM when it comes to that.
You mean between the pod and VM?
In the VM, they can even go to different network namespaces, right? There's nothing that says that these are connected to the same default Linux network namespace inside the VM. So they need to be able to be separated.
And that's, if it's inside the VM, it's up to the, again, application. So that's something that I don't think.
Yeah, but I mean, so if it's used in there, either you say that, no, you cannot have that sort of installation in your VMs because we don't provide for that isolation inside the pods, and that's fine for a specific cloud to say, right?
Yeah.
But it must be equally fine for a cloud to say, I support this.
I'm not sure I follow the last part.
I can do a specific use case for you on this one that shows where the ETH0 and ETH1 are in both different network namespaces inside it, or VRFs that basically have overloading going on. And that you cannot take them down into the same routing table inside.
No, but there are use cases for that. But why, again, this is inside the VM pair. Why would I care? Why would, as I provide the underlying infrastructure, why would I care whatever the user does inside the VM?
Because this packets, the packet goes into the pod here, and it needs to be routed unless you say it's
so I ensure isolation, right? And
or are you saying that are you saying it's a layer 2 link? So what is this saying?
I'm not saying anything. This is just an example of what it is. What is under the hood? It's up to the private cloud provider, right? In this case, this is private cloud. So basically, then if I need to do VRFs because of my infrastructure
No,
requires
that's like
that's implementation specific, right?
if you would say that it's just an interface that goes through,
Yes,
that
and this case it could be, yeah,
then it would work.
yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And exactly keep in mind, those are just pictures of what it can be, and it's exactly what we are being kind of accused of, that we are providing solutions, and you're being kind of stuck on the solution. Don't think of it like that. This underlying infrastructure here, this section down below,
I'm
you can do
stuck
it
with
the way.
that. I'm working with it every day and sort of
No,
doing
but that
what's
can
needed
be
to
done. That can be done in 1,000 ways, and everyone can do it their own ways to do this. That's what I'm
that
trying
I
to
don't
imply.
agree with, but I mean, as long as it can be done in one way, I'm happy. That is nothing that it
Sure.
stops me from getting it to work.
Sure.
But
okay. And I think this is one bit that we don't have a call out in any of the use cases. Like this was supposed to be like identifying that's per interface. In our design, we are trying to introduce the pod network attachment object. So this is the per pod configuration. Where did I have it here? So we have pod network and pod network attachment. So we don't have really use case for this guy, right? How would I justify introducing this pod network attachment to specify specific parameters per pod rather than globally per network? So this was supposed to, the use case 10 is supposed to be that. Yeah, there was a voice.
If you want,
Yeah,
if you
I
want
was
a
just-
liquid or VFIO, that could be an attachment. You want to run DPDK.
Could you repeat what you mean?
That's right. If you would want to run DPDK in your application, you would like to consume the service as a VFIO device.
So that will be handled. That will be handled by, again, implementation and represented the pod network as such, right? Then
But you don't want an interface. You don't want an interface visible in your scope. In your
no.
table.
You want to have the VFIO based, right? One.
Yeah.
And that's perfectly fine. And basically, you can represent that your pod network is that type of network where all the interfaces
but
are.
if I have one pod network where some pods attach with an interface and some other ones do it with a VFIO, so it's not part of the network; it's the consuming of the network.
So that will be, so depending on how you want to represent your pod network, right? I can create 2 separate pod networks for that. Though and this is where, again, it boils down to someone's setup for the cluster, right? The administrator operator of the cluster, how they want to kind of hack and slash this. Because I can have multiple pod networks, one pod network for same, let's say, subnet or L2 domain, and with VFs, and the other pod network exactly the same VLAN, let's say L2 domain, but with now one net device, the other VFIO PCI, right? VFIO
I understand,
PCI.
but you think that is part of the pod network object? I would say it's more an attachment attribute. It's how you consume the service.
So I think it's still, again, as I said, can be divided. If I were to apply something, and again, there is a lot of flexibility of what a pod network represents. And I agree with you. In some cases, it can say pod network equals L2 VLAN. And that can be the case for some, right? And then I agree with you. In that case, I would have to have the attachment to specify, okay, I want to attach through net device, or I want to attach through VFIO PCI, right? That's one of the use cases.
Through GPU, maybe you want to go straight into an RDMA device in the DPU.
Or even that. Yeah, fair. And that's fair. But then how would we, what will be the use case for that? Then how would you call out as the use case, right? Because that's kind of a solution.
No, it's okay. I thought it was a bit of inconsistent to put this kind of, to have to create different networks when the only thing that's different is how you consume them.
I guess it depends whether the pod network refers to the actual network or whether it's a way of attaching to the network. I'm really just echoing what Miguel put into the comment.
Yeah.
And very much in the way that the Multus specification, the resource there is not a pod network, but a network attachment definition that defines how the network attaches.
And then that requires you to have two, right? You cannot have, so that's another thing, right? You cannot specify that part. Can you? You cannot, right? With NATs, you can just say that one is for VFIO, the other one is for net device, right? You cannot have what I want to say. You cannot have one network attachment and then through the pod annotation specify, okay, this I will attach to this pod network attachment definition, but through VFIO or the other. I know this will allow that, right? Slightly differently, but this is what I'm currently. Multus doesn't allow that. What you're Anders, what you're calling out, Multus does not allow that for that. You see that, Peter?
I
Sorry,
understand. but
Multus
also-
Multus doesn't allow what?
Peter.
Sorry, I'm confused.
To what Anders is trying to call out that the network attachment, where I had that picture. Let me just call out that picture.
But guys, we are redoing the API. We don't need a copy of Multus.
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. Yeah, exactly. And that's the point of this. And basically, Peter, I'm trying to call out that Multus doesn't allow for that, where
Mm.
I create my centralized object, in this case, network attachment definition. If I
Yeah.
want to treat it as such, I don't have to, but if I want to,
Mm.
right? Unless I create one network attachment per pod, which you can do that as well,
Yeah.
right?
So
So
the
that's what I'm
Multus model is put annotations in the pods. You can put a big blob of arbitrary annotations in there, which are kind of logically equivalent to the pod network attachment,
That's
but they're obviously
true.
much nastier to handle.
Yeah.
Because who
That's-
wants to deal with JSON spaghetti and annotations?
and that was the kind of, and that's fair. That's okay. That comparison, yes, that's that's the point of this guy, right? The network attachment is basic replacement of that big JSON in pods for Multus. Yes. But then, having said all this, anyone has some ideas on what will be the proper use case for such thing?
I might have one.
Go ahead.
I've actually raised this in the opens KEP. Like, let me put the link out here. Now the thing is, like, the PR is already quite big, so I'm not sure if you can actually kind of access this directly. So I'll kind of echo this back here. So the idea is I want to have, so I have VMs running using this, and I want the IP address that is assigned to the VM via IPAM to kind of survive the VM shutdown. Like I stop it, then I start it again, and I wanted to have the exact same IP it got in the beginning. And also, if I migrate the VM, I wanted to have the same IP once it is migrated to
I
a
see.
different
So
node.
let's static IP. Can I call it like that?
Yeah, well, we've called it sticky IP, but yeah,
okay,
because
no, that's fine.
static is kind of something else. So
Okay,
a little bit overloaded.
but that will be we can add it to. Let me go back to this for a second. So we can add it to private cloud because this is where VM, and this will be support for sticky IPs. That's fair. Is that okay?
Okay, that's
And
perfectly
basically
fine
this,
for me.
how would you achieve that, right? And one of the approach will be to achieve the sticky IP will be and this is what I replied to you.
Yeah,
You could use the network attachment, right, to exactly do that, right? Because then you can just
exactly.
destroy the pod and then create another pod, another
Exactly.
VM with pointing to the same guy.
Exactly. So I would just need a box to put the IP in, and this
Yeah.
thing would be the box.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Yeah,
Okay,
thanks
cool.
for that. Yeah, that's
All good.
fair. Yeah. Any other ideas? So let me get back to this guy. Share this stuff again. Any other ideas for this use case? Because we have the sticky IP. Any others? I cannot think of
For
any.
the sticky IP, we actually had a previous company actually had a similar requirement. And the one hurdle that we would always run into is if, say, the VM were, that host were to die and the DRS would move the VM to a different node. Every now and then, that VM could land on a node where the network wasn't available and the IP address, the traffic would just get dropped.
Right.
So, I mean, maybe like whenever we actually dance with the scheduler in the,
Yeah, that's
something just to keep in mind.
No, this was definitely one of the requirements to. No, maybe step back. Today we simplified this, and I think there is some state. I don't know. One of the requirements says there is, or maybe I removed the requirement of selective availability per node, right? And right now we assume all networks are available on all the nodes, and that's the current design of the CAP to simplify it. But what you're saying can be achieved through some other means. I assume some mutating webhooks. What basically is being done for network attachment definition, that they have some sort of network node selector, and you can specify that, and then it can kind of force a pod that requires a network attachment definition to a specific node pool, which has that explicit network available, right? So you could do that, something similar here with some sort of mutating webhook. But in the future, I already talked with some of the DRA folks on how they are planning to kind of solve this. And this is something that in the future we could probably leverage as well to enable the node selectiveness, right? That's something that will, but basically this will be out of scope for now for this CAP, Michael. All right. I think we covered most of those, guys. Then any other use cases that you want to add? Let me go back to here. So we have private cloud, on-premise. We have the AIML, telecom, and the producer consumer use cases. So we have 5 that I'm going to kind of try to do a good job for this. There's an example that Michael last week provided. So I'll try to convert them to something like this. And then let's review that next week and approve on that. And then I will update the CAP with those so that we have a proper real life use cases rather than just the kind of solutions that we currently have. Any other comments to this? All right, I think there was a good one other topic to bring up is pod IPs, maybe in pod status. And I think we have Dan, you're here. Why would you say that? Because the CAP says that what if we were to expand that pod IPs list, maybe pod IPs list, because this is explicitly for that. In pod status, what the idea is to, let me maybe get back to that so that at least we are all on the same page. You saw this, but so that everyone on the same page, what we are thinking of pod IP status, where is an example? Here is an example. So we have pod IPs in pod spec, in pod status, and we were thinking of, this is a list of struct, so adding another field called pod network, which basically will assign the IP to specific pod network. I wonder how many, except for, I know that Antonio called out the endpoint/controller that relies on this, and I explicitly, I think, added that to the CAP to call this out. And you say that there are much more other components that will rely on this 2 IPs in the list, and we should not change that.
It's not even should not. You can't. It's an API break. Like it's just not going to be approved. It will break external components that assume that all of the IPs there are primary, or that there are only 2, or that they're always of opposite IP families. So yeah, it absolutely guaranteed it will not pass API review if you say that you're going to add to pod IPs.
So basically that will have to be another field then, what you're saying?
Yeah, we had talked like way back when I linked to
I saw the link.
We had talked about, oh, well, maybe we'll add pod extra IPs. But I was thinking like you could actually just add status networks, which would mirror spec networks, but then have broken out by network the pod IPs and any other information, status related information on a per network basis. And that actually seems like a good organization.
Oh, that's fair. I see. Okay, let me basically, just basically mirror this, right? What you're saying. And then with the IP and then interface name, whatever it was. Okay, that's fair. Let me just do that then. Yeah, I agree with you because it is tricky. We know the internal objects with work, but yeah, there is plenty of external things that will get screw up. Michael, there you go. Michael,
Yeah, I was just saying because we have pod IP, then we have additional IPs or whatever the field name is. And Dan, are you saying that if they were to add pod network and interface name to the existing pod IP struct, that would not get approved?
So, you can add elements to the individual pod IPs, but you can't add additional pod IPs to the array. Like the way that if you look at the definition of the field in the Kubernetes API, the way that it's defined, the guarantees that are made, it says there will only be either a single IP or a dual stack pair of IPs. But it says we might add, there could be arbitrary additional information about those two IPs in the future. So we can potentially add those and then use that to match the primary IPs against the corresponding networks if that turns out to be useful. We just can't add new elements to the array.
So there's in the code, because I have to look at it again because pod IP is just whatever is the element 0 in that string slice in sync pod, and then you have the additional IP addresses that could be dual stack. Is there an actual say if it's greater than line, if greater than 2, throw error or something right now?
Yeah. Right now the API is like that, and I was hoping, okay, let's change that. But I agree, the API, if we have explicitly called this out in the API description, then I agree with you, Dan. Yeah, that's something that we cannot change, right? It explicitly says it cannot be larger than 2.
Well, that's what I'm contesting with a feature flag there, because it's not breaking anything if it's feature flag. That's what
it is. Like if you look at the endpoint slice controller code, the current code, it just iterates through the array and creates and adds an IP to the endpoint slice for every IP that appears there, which is not the behavior that you want in multi-network, right? So saying, oh, well, we'll just change that. But the problem is that there are other components outside of our control that do similar things. And we can't just say, oh, well, we'll force all of them to change in sync with us.
Yeah, 100%. And can you send me that link, just because I like to document all of the things that touch, these fields?
Which link?
For the endpoint slice.
And Michael, that will be tricky on identifying who's touching it, because as Dan said, there is probably multiple and external functionalities. I don't know. Let's for example, gateway API. I don't know whether they do or not, but they might. And basically, they will rely on okay. We in the definition it is said it's going to be no more than 2, and it has one from each different family. So and basically suddenly they will have more. And now they have to reach for network. Why?
Yeah. Oh, I understand all that.
Yeah. So that's the kind of the gist, and I agree with that one. Yeah. And thanks for the hint, Dan. I'm mirroring this one might be the best thing to go with. All right. I think that's we cleared that one out. Let me just maybe note this here. All right. Any other comments on this? All right. Any other topics? I think we are at the time. Maybe I have one kind of call out. We got some comments. I thank you, Dan, for your I think review as well. I haven't had a chance to look through the comments that was kind of came up for the last 2 weeks. One thing that's, I think, to this group, one call out is that I think we need to show up more in force in terms of engagement with this, in terms of outside of this meeting. At least this currently, as even the last time when we brought this topic in the Kubernetes SIG networking, we didn't have too many voices that would try to say, yeah, we need multi-networking. That was my voice and maybe some 2 other voices, and that was it. So that kind of feels for the leadership of the SIG networking that Maciek just wants it and that's it. I know I'm representing this community, but unfortunately the optics of this whole thing looks like there is not much of need for this, because I think not many voices showing up. And I think my ask currently is to try to go, if you have time, or commit some time to the CAP and kind of start, as we're applying, showing up and kind of, let's say, defending, in quotation mark, defending the what we want to add and do. Otherwise, I don't think my own voice will be justifiable to say that, yes, let's do this. Currently, I think DRA, and we have to meet, right, Michael, with, I don't think you didn't meet yet with
No, we haven't. I had a
yeah. So basically, yeah, we need to meet with DRA, but DRA mentioned that they do some sort of interface support as well. And I think we're gonna get punted to that. We might get punted to that. So just reuse DRA. They already have scheduling. They already have individual claim. They have global claim. So basically, all the kind of pieces are the same. And I don't think my single voice can change all this. And considering this is a community project, the more community will push towards having most of this, then that's, community wants it, community will do that, right? But if it's just single voice, that's kind of tricky. So I kind of asking for help on get engaged with some of this, because otherwise I'm not sure whether my single voice can do much about this. All right. That's kind of one call out to this group to kind of keep a bit help with the CAP and getting this in, because we are at the phase where we might not push it further on, and we just get stopped and be stopped in tracks to say that, yeah, no, and we just, there's DRA and let's just reuse that. All right. I think that's all for today. Thanks everyone. Hear from you next week.
Thanks, Maciej. Great, bud.
Thanks.
Bye bye.